Welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of our Packers News live chat alongside Tom Silverstein. I'm Olivia Reiner. The Packers hit the field for their only padded practice of the week leading up to their game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll bring you the latest, some injury updates, and we'll take a sneak peek at the Bucs' run defense in just a moment. However, as always, we want to hear from you. If you're over on Facebook, Periscope, or YouTube, leave us a question or a thought down in the chat. Tom and I will get to some of those toward the end of our conversation today. Let's take a look at maybe a positive bit of news for once. We start our show often with the latest injury dismay on the Packers. I think we should start with some good news for Packers fans for once. Wide receiver Davante Adams practiced in full capacity today in pads. It's his first padded practice at full capacity in several weeks since he injured himself week 2 with the hamstring. It's encouraging for his availability come Sunday. However, the Packers have been playing really well without him. They're 2-0 since he's departed, and the team has scored 67 points without Davante Adams. But Tom, how much can Davante Adams return if he's healthy enough to go improve this Packers offense?
Well, for one, I think he's going to be ready to go. I think he'll be cleared to play. For another, they are going to need to lean on him. It's just going to turn out that way. There's going to be a game, and it might be this one, where they can't run the ball, and then all of a sudden it's their wide receiver core against a defense that is stopping their run, stopping their running backs. And what do? Well, then you go to Davante Adams and go to him a lot because he can get open no matter what the coverages are. So I think there will be a need for him sooner than later. And the fact that they got through those games without him is really, it's a feather on their cap, because you shouldn't be able to really win a lot of games without him, and they have.
Some good news too. Defensive linemen participated in padded practice today in a full capacity too. That's all the good news I'm going to share with you for the moment. I gave you your dessert first, Packers fans. Now you have to eat your vegetables. Cornerback Kevin King did not participate in padded practice today, as he's been dealing with a quad injury that he sustained a couple weeks ago against the Atlanta Falcons. The next man up that came in for Kevin King against the Falcons was Josh Jackson. He got to play for a little bit. He was only targeted 3 times. However, he allowed catches on all 3 of his targets. He allowed about 11.7 yards per catch. If Jackson is called upon, if King isn't healthy enough to go, how can defensive coordinator Mike Pettin make life a little bit easier for Jackson?
Well, first we have to see how they're going to match up. I think this is something that Pettin and his staff are going to have to spend some time thinking about. How do they want to match this up? Because on one side, you've got Mike Evans, who's 6'5" and can run like the wind. And then if Tampa Bay has Chris Godwin back, who is just a marvelous receiver, then they've got to worry about him too. He's been out with a hamstring. So what do? Do you put Josh Jackson on Mike Evans and then put a safety over the top? Maybe that's the best thing, because Josh Jackson is big enough to wrestle around with Mike Evans. But you can't put Josh Jackson on him one-on-one like you could put Jair Alexander. So it's really going to be, what do they do here? Maybe they just keep both safeties back and protect their corners. That might be the easiest thing they do. I think the one thing they won't do is move Chandon Sullivan out of the slot. He's their slot corner, and I don't think they're going to mess around with that.
Let's take a look ahead to the game this weekend when we're talking about the Packers run game and the Bucs run defense. I saw a couple comments and questions yesterday in our live stream. A lot of people out in our lovely audience want to see running back Aaron Jones pop off for a big game. It's been a little while since he's had 100+ yards on the ground. The only game that he's had over 100 yards this season was against the Detroit Lions in week 2. Over the last couple games, he's averaged about 70 rushing yards through 2 games there. But this weekend, Tom, it might not be the game to expect Aaron Jones to pop off. The Bucs run defense has been really good at limiting yards on the ground. They've only allowed 2.7 yards per attempt against opposing offenses. How can Aaron Jones and the other running backs try to create some lanes in this very stout run defense?
Well, if you got Aaron Jones on your fantasy team and you're looking for more rushing yards, this might not be the week. Tampa Bay's got a really good active defense, and I think they're gonna focus on Aaron Jones. They're gonna try to take him out, but I don't know if they're gonna have to overdo it because their run defense is so good and it's really fast, and they're going to try to blow up all the running lanes and try to out athlete the Packers offensive line. It may be that Rodgers has to get the ball to Jones through the air. We've seen that many times. I mean, that's just kind of a fact now, is that especially when Adams was out, was that teams were going to just load the box and they were not going to let Aaron Jones run for 150 yards against them. And you saw what LaFleur's answer was to spread the ball around, including Aaron Jones. So I think it's going to be tough sledding, but they've got to try to run the ball. Their offense is not the same when they don't get like 20 carries.
The Bucs' run defense will be at a disadvantage without star nose tackle Vita Vea, who's out for the season after sustaining a leg injury against the Bears last week. Tom, how different might this run defense look without Vea?
Well, the one thing he really does is keep the inside linebackers clean. I mean, they can really flow because it takes two guys to block him, probably three guys to block him, and then Ndamukong Suh in the middle. So you're totally allowing those two guys to eat up three linemen, and then the linebackers can just flow however they'd like. And so without him in there, it changes it. He's a guy you have to double team a lot, and now they don't have to do that. But I wouldn't sneeze at Tampa Bay's replacements, including William Golston, who's been really active lately. So it's a loss, but I still think they'll be pretty stout.
All right. Well, we've got our friend David, David over here in our Facebook chat. David says, wait a minute, Tom, what about the Packers offensive line? They've been really sound at creating lanes for the Packers running backs. How are they going to fare against the Bucs defensive front?
Well, they have, yeah, and I don't mean to write them off. I think this offensive line has been outstanding. I think it's been better in pass blocking than it has been in run blocking. Their pass protection has been off the charts good. So if they're going to get a lot of blitzes, they're going to get some run blitzes. It will be a challenge. It's going to be a hot day, and Tampa, they're a little salty after losing to the Bears. So yeah, maybe they can run the ball, but just you got to remember that Tampa Bay's had the number one running defense since the start of the 2019 season. So there's a reason why they're ranked number one. And so if the offensive line might be good, but you don't want to just keep banging your head on the wall if it's going to result in minimum yardage.
Thanks, David, for your thoughts. We appreciate it. Let's take a question here from Todd. Todd asks, is inside linebacker Chris Barnes going to start this week and be the signal caller on defense? How confident is defensive coordinator Mike Pettin that Chris Barnes is capable of wearing the green dot?
Yeah, I think he is. I think he will be the starter. I think it'll be him and Ty Summers. And I kind of look for Chris Barnes' role to start to increase gradually. I think they really like him, and he's smart. He's not the biggest guy. So, you got to have some force in there with him, and they will get that maybe a little bit later when Kamal Martin comes back. And right now, Ty Summers is doing okay. But I do think Barnes is kind of the captain of the defense right now. He's been given that mantle, and he's kind of handling it pretty well.
We've got lots of injury-related questions over in the chat. Let's just knock them all right out. We'll go back to David here. David asks, is defensive lineman Kenny Clark a go? As I mentioned toward the beginning of our show today, he was a full participant in practice for the first time since yesterday. It was the first full participation for him in a padded practice. Tom, how likely is it that Clark will be healthy enough to go on Sunday?
Well, it's a pretty good sign. You practice in full in pads on a Thursday. I would say that he's going to play.
There's some good news there for you all on Kenny Clark. How about maybe some not so good news here? John asks for an update on running back Tyler Ervin. Ervin has not practiced over the last couple of days. He's been dealing with a wrist injury. Tom, if he doesn't practice tomorrow, how likely is it that the Packers can make a game time decision on him?
Well, I think that is a thing where they can make a game time decision. I think, so it's a wrist injury, and really what they're concerned about is just him being able to hang on to the ball. I don't think this is a major injury, and, he can probably still field it as a returner. He can certainly run jet motions and carry it, but they just have to make sure that he can hold on to the ball. And I think what they're doing, my best guess of what they're doing is just letting the wrist calm down for the week. Why push it? They know he knows his assignments. And if they give him, really it'll end up being 2 full weeks off. Maybe that wrist will be in better shape that he could play.
Thank you, John. Let's take this question here from Levi. Levi would like to know if we have a timetable on wide receiver Allen Lazard, who was placed on injured reserve with a core injury just a couple weeks ago. How long does it take for a player to recover from a core injury, Tom?
It can be a 6 to 10 week injury. So I don't think we see him. Maybe if they're really lucky, they could see him against Minnesota. No, that's probably too early. It's probably going to be at least 6 weeks. That's my guess. There have been guys who've come back faster than that, but not a lot of wide receivers who've come back faster than that. And I just think it's going to take some time. So I would say sometime mid-November.
Throwing it back to Tyler Ervin, Frank asks, with Swerve and Ervin injured, who is going to return kicks and punts for the Green Bay Packers, Tom?
Good question. So Josh Jackson replaced him as a punt returner. And honest to gosh, I can't remember who replaced him as a kickoff returner. But I think there's a good chance it'll be Darius Shepard. Now, everybody remembers what happened when he got his big shot last year, and it was kind of a disaster. But, I asked special teams coach Sean Menenga about it today, and he said that Shepard has worked on it just intensely, and he's the first one down to catch punts. And so I think he's gained their confidence. But, if they use him, they'll be holding their breath until he gets through a game where, he catches everything and handles it well. But I think he's a candidate to return both punt and kickoff returns.
If I'm not mistaken, Tom, wasn't Chandon Sullivan in the mix at returner?
I think he took some he might have taken some punt returns, I'm trying to think back to training camp when that was really the last time we saw a special teams practice. And Jair Alexander was taking reps back then. So I kind of doubt it'll be him. I would guess it's going to be Josh Jackson. I think they'll play it safe. But we'll see.
Thank you, Frank. Hello, Steve. Let's flip it over to Steve. Steve asks, is this the time for running back A.J. Dillon to finally get a carry or two? I spoke to running backs coach Ben Sermons about this today. He said that A.J. Dillon is always in the plan. It's just for whatever reason, the Packers don't get to the plan. They'd rather have the matchup is better to keep Aaron Jones or Jamal Williams in there. At what point do the Packers turn to A.J. Dillon and say, hey, we need you on the field for this particular look?
Well, I think I've said this every week that I've been on here. It's like there's no hurry. If Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones are playing really well, why take him off the field? There's no reason to take him off the field. A.J. Dillon will get his chances, and they'll come. I think you try to slip him in whenever you can, and it's possible this game they will need him. The two running backs might get kind of gassed in the heat, and they may need A.J. Dillon. And if they can wear Tampa Bay's defense down a little bit, if they can enjoy a large margin on the time of possession, then maybe a guy like Dillon can start to punish them a little bit. But I completely get what Ben Simmons is saying. You got two backs who are playing really well. Hey, rookie, you're going to have to sit on the bench for a little while until you show you can play as good as those two guys.
To play a little more devil's advocate, David says, hey, maybe A.J. Dillon could get a look on the goal line when the Packers are down in the red zone from the 1 yard line. It's 4th and 1, and they're looking for a running back to punch it in. Why not call on A.J. Dillon?
Yeah, or why not use him as a decoy? Put him in there as with two tight ends and make it seem like you're going to pound him up the middle and play action right to Robert Tonyan or Jay Sternberger. You could do something like that. You just don't want to make it obvious that every time you bring in A.J. Dillon, you're going to run it smack up the middle. I do think he does. I do think he can help them in short yardage. They need a big back who can get that yard. They just have to be really confident in his ball security and his ability to hit the right holes.
Continuing on our conversation about the run defense that we started a little bit earlier, Steve asks, do you think the Packers will use Aaron Jones more as a receiver instead of a running back because of the Bucs' stout defensive line? How likely is it that Aaron Jones gets involved a little bit more in the passing game?
Yeah, it could be. I think what the Packers are going to do is toy with the Buccaneers a little bit and maybe use a little bit of Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams together and see what kind of personnel they get from the Buccaneers, who are a little bit short in the secondary. And so if they can get them to come out and base defense, by maybe bringing in two running backs or having Aaron Jones and two tight ends, maybe they can get some coverage that they like, some matchups in the passing game that they like. And maybe they can get Aaron Jones matched up with a linebacker. So that'll be a cat and mouse game, how the two teams are going to respond. Are the Packers going to try to see whether Tampa comes out in their base defense, and then they split out Aaron Jones and use him in the passing game? Or if they come out with an extra corner, then maybe they try to run the ball against them.
Thanks, Steve, for your question. Zach asks, what do the Packers do with the 3 open roster spots they currently have? It makes most sense to believe that the Packers are leaving at least 2 of those spots there open for inside linebacker Kamal Martin and wide receiver Equinemius St. Brown when they are healthy enough to come off of injured reserve. However, that one other spot, Tom, what are they going to do with it?
Well, so they've got some practice squad guys who are going to run out of their eligibility pretty soon to be called up. I think Billy Wynn has used up his 2 opportunities to be called up from the practice squad. So I could see him getting signed to the 53-man roster this week. I would be really surprised if Kamal Martin was called up this week. I kind of think that it's just a little too early for him to be back. I think they're getting him a good week of practice in, and maybe they'll see what next week brings. Equinemius St. Brown, I got to think there's a chance that, they may, depending on how that knee injury was, I kind of think he's been around a lot, and it seems like he's been working pretty aggressively on it. So maybe he is ready to be called up. But I think they just keep that flexible in case they need a spot, where they need to bring up a practice squad guy they've brought up twice before. And it gives them a lot of flexibility. And they don't, with the rosters being larger than they have been in the past, you have that kind of flexibility. You don't necessarily have to have a full roster.
Thank you, Zach, for your question. That is going to do it for us tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back tomorrow to take your questions and to preview once again the game against the Bucks in just, I guess, in 24 hours or so. It'll probably be a little bit earlier tomorrow as we don't have a late media availability schedule. So I'll make sure to share the time on social media so you can come and join us once again. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.